Have you ever had a conversation where you were completely confident you were right, but somehow ended up questioning yourself instead? Today, we're breaking down 5 manipulative phrases that flip the blame onto you, make you doubt your own reality, and keep you apologizing for things that aren't your fault. By the end of this video, you'll recognize these tactics instantly, and you'll never let anyone gaslight you again. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and comment below with the city you're watching from, because this is about taking control of your mind and your life, no matter where you are. 1. The reality-twisting phrase, "You're overreacting." When someone uses the phrase, "you're overreacting," it operates as a psychological smokescreen designed to pull you away from the truth and push you into self-doubt. It's not just a dismissive statement. It's a strategic maneuver that targets your perception, your emotional awareness, and your right to express concern. The power of this phrase lies in how quickly it can destabilize your internal compass. In one sentence, your logical reaction is reframed as irrational. Your valid feeling is reframed as emotional chaos. Your clarity is reframed as confusion. And once that shift happens, the person who used this phrase gains the upper hand, not through reason, but through subtle emotional pressure. This kind of manipulation doesn't come from raising their voice or making a dramatic scene. It comes from minimizing your experience so effectively that you start shrinking inside your own mind. The phrase works by attacking the foundation of your emotional confidence. Most people don't want to seem dramatic, overly sensitive, or unreasonable. So the moment you hear, "you're overreacting," it triggers an internal scramble to evaluate yourself. You start scanning your tone, your words, the situation itself, trying to pinpoint where you might have gone too far. And while you're busy doing that internal audit, the other person has already shifted the spotlight away from their behavior and onto your reaction. This is the core mechanism of the tactic, redirecting the conversation away from accountability and making you question your emotional legitimacy. Suddenly, you're defending how you feel instead of addressing what actually happened. This phrase becomes even more powerful when delivered calmly. A calm, "you're overreacting," makes you feel like the unreasonable one. Your justified reaction suddenly feels loud, shaky, ungrounded, even when it isn't. It creates an illusion that the emotional imbalance is coming from you, not from the situation or their actions. And when someone consistently responds to your concerns with this line, it begins to condition you. You learn to silence your discomfort before you even voice it. You learn to swallow your intuition because you don't want to wear the label of being dramatic. That silence becomes their shield. Your self-restraint becomes their escape route. What makes this phrase manipulative is not the words alone, but the intention behind them. It's not being said to create understanding. It's being said to create advantage. It's not addressing the issue. It's dismissing the issue. It's not acknowledging your perspective. It's flattening your perspective. And when used repeatedly, it rewires how you evaluate your own emotions. You start asking yourself whether you're imagining things, whether you're too sensitive, whether you're expecting too much. But what you're really doing is letting someone else rewrite the emotional rules of the relationship. The person using this phrase benefits from your hesitation. Every time you hesitate, they gain a little more control over the narrative. Every time you shrink your reaction, they expand their freedom to behave without accountability. And every time you doubt yourself, they reinforce the idea that they get to decide what is valid and what is not. Your overreacting becomes a tool not to calm the situation, but to reshape it in their favor. It's a way of pushing the responsibility back onto you, while they remain comfortably untouched by the emotional weight of their own behavior. 2. The deflection phrase. "If you really cared, you wouldn't question me." This phrase is one of the most effective emotional manipulation tools because it blends guilt, pressure, and moral reversal into a single line. Instead of addressing the issue at hand, the person shifts the entire conversation onto your loyalty and your intentions. It's a psychological trap disguised as a plea for understanding. At first, it sounds like vulnerability, as if they're expressing hurt. But beneath the surface, it's a carefully designed tactic to make you feel like you're betraying them simply by wanting clarity. The purpose of this line is not to resolve anything. The purpose is to shut down the discussion by turning your reasonable questions into accusations. Once you accept the idea that questioning their behavior equals a lack of care, they no longer have to answer for anything. This tactic works because it strikes at one of the deepest human needs: the need to be seen as caring, supportive, and loyal. Most people don't want to be perceived as cold or uncaring, especially towards someone important in their life. So when you hear, "If you really cared, you wouldn't question me," your mind instinctively shifts into self-defense. You begin replaying your tone, your intentions, your motivations, trying to prove that what you were doing came from a place of concern, not accusation. Meanwhile, the person who used this phrase doesn't have to justify anything. They've already steered the conversation away from their actions and toward your supposed shortcomings. Instead of them explaining what they did, now you're explaining why you asked. The cleverness of this phrase lies in how it reframes a boundary as disrespect. Wanting clarity becomes an attack. Wanting honesty becomes betrayal. Wanting transparency becomes insensitivity. Before you even realize what happened, you find yourself apologizing for bringing up something that mattered to you. And once they see that this tactic works, it becomes a pattern. Every time you try to talk about something uncomfortable, they respond by questioning your loyalty instead of addressing the topic. This keeps them in control because the moment you stop questioning them, they gain the freedom to behave however they want without ever having to take responsibility. This phrase also plays heavily on emotional blackmail. It suggests that love or care must always be unconditional to the point of silence. It implies that real care means accepting everything without question. But that's not care. That's compliance. True care includes communication, honesty, and accountability. Manipulative care demands quiet obedience. When someone uses this line, they are not strengthening the relationship, they are tightening their control over it. They are planting the idea that your concerns are harmful, that your boundaries are unkind, and that your questions are proof of disloyalty. Over time, this kind of emotional deflection makes you walk on eggshells. You start anticipating their reactions before you speak. You rehearse your words, trying to soften every question so it doesn't trigger their guilt tactic. You start doubting whether you have the right to even ask for clarity. And that self-censorship is exactly what they want. When they can make you feel guilty for speaking up, they never have to face the discomfort of accountability. Your silence becomes their comfort zone. This technique is powerful because it plays on your desire to maintain peace. You don't want to hurt them. You don't want to be misunderstood. So you end up swallowing truths that should have been spoken. And as you suppress your voice, they expand their ability to operate without being challenged. They position themselves as the emotionally wounded one, while quietly steering the dynamic in their favor. Ultimately, the phrase, "If you really cared, you wouldn't question me," is not about care at all. It's about control, wrapped in the language of vulnerability, designed to make you forget that asking questions is not an attack, but a fundamental part of any genuine connection. 3. The rewriting history phrase. That never happened. This phrase is one of the most powerful forms of psychological manipulation because it targets the core of your reality, your memory, your perception, and your confidence in what you experienced. When someone looks you directly in the eye and calmly says, "That never happened," they're not just denying an event, they're denying your ability to accurately understand your own life. It's a tactic designed to destabilize your internal sense of truth. The moment you begin to question what actually happened, the person using this phrase gains control over the entire narrative. They're not simply disagreeing with you. They're attempting to overwrite your recollection with their version of events, which slowly erodes your trust in yourself. The effectiveness of this phrase comes from its simplicity. It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, and it doesn't excuse. It erases. It wipes the slate clean in a single sentence. When someone repeatedly insists that your memory is flawed, you begin to feel the need to defend not just your perspective, but your senses, your intuition, and your basic awareness. That's why this tactic is so mentally draining. It forces you into a position where you're no longer discussing the issue. You're fighting for your own clarity. And the moment you shift from addressing their behavior to proving your recollection, they have successfully redirected the entire conversation. Another layer of manipulation in this phrase lies in how confidently it's often delivered. When someone denies something with total certainty, your mind instinctively double-checks itself, even if you were completely sure before. Confidence can be persuasive, even when it's deceptive. The more calmly they say it, the more you start to wonder if you misunderstood something. You replay the situation in your head, searching for cracks, trying to figure out whether you misinterpreted what was said or done. This internal replay loop is exactly what the manipulator relies on. While you're busy questioning yourself, they sit in a position of safety, protected from accountability by your confusion. Over time, hearing, "that never happened," conditions you to distrust your own intuition. You begin to hesitate before bringing up concerns because you anticipate being told that your version of events is flawed. Eventually, you may start second-guessing your own memory before you even speak. This self-doubt becomes a form of self-silencing. You stop confronting issues, not because the issues disappear, but because you've been trained to believe that mentioning them will only result in you being told you're mistaken. When a person can make you question something you know you witnessed, they no longer need to argue the facts. They simply redefine them. This tactic is especially damaging because it disrupts your internal stability. When your memory becomes a battleground, your confidence becomes collateral damage. You start doubting not only this specific event, but your general ability to recognize patterns, spot red flags, or trust your instincts in the future. And once you stop trusting yourself, the other person's version of events becomes the default reality. They get to decide what happened, what didn't happen, and what is worth discussing. Their voice becomes louder than your own thoughts, not because it's true, but because your sense of certainty has been weakened. The phrase, "that never happened," is not just a denial. It is a strategic rewrite of reality designed to keep you off balance. It shifts the power dynamic by making your memory the problem, not their behavior. It convinces you to fight yourself instead of addressing the actual issue. And once your mind becomes occupied with trying to prove what you know is real, they no longer need to defend their actions. They've already won the argument by pulling it out from under you. 4. The victim inversion phrase. "I can't believe you're attacking me." This phrase is one of the most subtle yet emotionally disarming forms of manipulation, because it takes your attempt at communication and flips it into a personal attack. Instead of engaging with what you're saying, the person instantly shifts into a position of emotional injury. It creates a dynamic where you are placed in the role of aggressor, even when you approach the conversation calmly, respectfully, or with genuine concern. The moment this phrase is spoken, the entire energy of the discussion changes. You're no longer talking about the issue. Now you're defending your tone, your intention, your character, and your emotional stance. This tactic works because it reframes accountability as cruelty, painting your effort to address a problem as an act of hostility. What makes this phrase powerful is how quickly it shuts down meaningful dialogue. It introduces emotional chaos into a conversation that was meant to be honest. When someone says, "I can't believe you're attacking me," the implication is that you've crossed a line, even if you haven't. It shifts the emotional weight onto your shoulders. Suddenly, instead of standing on solid ground, you feel like you've unintentionally caused harm. And that guilt becomes leverage. You start dialing back your words, softening your message, or apologizing for expressing something that was completely valid. The person who uses this tactic benefits from your emotional retreat because it takes all attention away from their actions and places it on your supposed aggression. Another layer of this manipulation is the emotional fragility it displays. When someone positions themselves as the wounded one, they gain immediate sympathy. You feel pressure to comfort them rather than continue the conversation. Their hurt replaces your concerns. Their emotional performance becomes the focus. It's a strategy that turns self-protection into self-sacrifice. Over time, this conditioning teaches you that raising difficult topics leads to emotional fallout, so you avoid them. You begin to silence yourself because you don't want to be seen as hurtful or harsh. And that silence becomes the space where manipulation thrives. This phrase also introduces an unspoken rule into the relationship. You must manage their emotions at the cost of your own. Every time you try to address something real, they respond with emotional pain. Every time you express a boundary, they imply you're attacking them. Every time you bring up something uncomfortable, they play the victim. This emotional inversion keeps them in control of the dynamic without ever having to actually take responsibility. It turns your strength into guilt, your honesty into insensitivity, and your courage into cruelty. It's a psychological maneuver that reroutes the conversation onto a path where they can maintain control by appearing powerless. What makes this tactic particularly damaging is the self-doubt it creates over time. When someone constantly responds to your boundaries as if they are wounds, you start believing that expressing your needs is inherently wrong. You start questioning whether your tone was too sharp or your concern was too heavy. You begin monitoring every word you say, emotionally tiptoeing to avoid triggering another accusation of attacking. This turns normal communication into emotional labor, and eventually, you become responsible not only for what you say, but for how they choose to interpret it. That burden becomes exhausting, and exhaustion leads to silence. The phrase, "I can't believe you're attacking me," ultimately serves one consistent purpose: deflection. It shifts the emotional responsibility onto you while freeing the other person from accountability. It reframes your attempt at connection as conflict. It makes you question your motives even when they were sincere. And the more you fall into the loop of defending your intentions, the less space there is to address the actual issue. Over time, this tactic trains you to protect their feelings at the expense of your own voice, creating a dynamic where you five, the emotional blackmail phrase. "You always make me feel like the bad one." This phrase is one of the most psychologically taxing forms of manipulation because it weaponizes emotion to shift responsibility onto someone else. When a person says, "You always make me feel like the bad one," they are not simply expressing hurt, they are subtly coercing you to take responsibility for their feelings, regardless of whether your actions or words warrant it. This statement reframes the situation, turning you from someone who is addressing an issue or expressing a valid concern into the source of their emotional discomfort. At first, it may feel like empathy is required, and you may instinctively try to reassure them, soften your tone, or even apologize for things you didn't do wrong. While you focus on resolving their feelings, the actual issue is left unexamined, and the manipulator gains full control over the narrative. The strength of this tactic lies in its subtlety. Unlike overt confrontation or aggression, it disguises control as vulnerability. It appears almost innocent, as if the person is merely communicating their hurt feelings. But beneath that facade lies a deliberate attempt to provoke guilt. Hearing, "You always make me feel like the bad one," triggers an internal response because most people do not want to be seen as unkind, cruel, or inconsiderate. The phrase attacks one of the deepest human needs: to feel moral, fair, and loving toward others. It exploits that need to silence your voice and reshape the conversation so that the focus is entirely on their perception rather than the facts of the situation. This phrase also creates an immediate power imbalance. By framing themselves as the victim, the speaker forces you into a defensive position. You suddenly become responsible for managing their emotions, and your own thoughts and concerns take a back seat. The moment you feel compelled to explain yourself or apologize, the manipulator achieves their goal. They redirect attention away from their behavior and onto your supposed wrongdoing. Over time, this repetition conditions you to self-censor and suppress your own perspective because you anticipate emotional backlash or accusations of being the bad one. The more often you respond to this manipulation, the more entrenched the dynamic becomes, and the easier it is for them to maintain control over conversations. Emotional blackmail also thrives on exaggeration and generalization. Words like always or never are common in this type of manipulation because they amplify the sense of guilt. When someone says, "You always make me feel like the bad one," it implies that your behavior is consistently harmful, even if it only happened once or twice. This exaggeration distorts reality and amplifies the emotional pressure, making you more likely to concede or apologize to restore peace. The phrase leverages your desire to be seen as fair and considerate, transforming a simple disagreement or boundary-setting moment into a moral dilemma where you are cast as the antagonist. Repeated exposure to this tactic erodes self-confidence. Each time you hear this line, your natural response is to question whether you are too harsh, insensitive, or unkind. You begin analyzing your tone, your intentions, and your actions excessively, trying to avoid triggering the manipulator's emotional accusations. This chronic self-scrutiny drains emotional energy and reduces your ability to communicate authentically. Over time, it becomes easier to avoid conflict altogether rather than risk being labeled as the source of pain, which reinforces the manipulator's control. Your voice, needs, and boundaries gradually shrink to accommodate their emotional narrative, leaving you frustrated, exhausted, and uncertain about your own perceptions. The phrase also creates a subtle cycle of guilt and compliance. By placing the emotional burden entirely on you, it encourages over-apologizing, people-pleasing, and compromise at the expense of your own well-being. Every time you bend to appease their feelings, it reinforces their ability to use emotion as a tool of control. They teach you, indirectly, that your needs are less important than their perception of you. This pattern not only undermines self-trust, but also prevents healthy communication and problem-solving. "You always make me feel like the bad one" is more than a complaint. It is a strategy of emotional manipulation designed to control, disorient, and dominate the conversation. It turns your attempts at clarity or boundary setting into guilt-inducing traps. It shifts accountability from the manipulator to you, trains you to self-censor, and erodes confidence over time, ensuring that their version of reality and emotional narrative remains unchallenged while your perspective is suppressed. The phrase, "I can't believe you're attacking me," ultimately serves one consistent purpose: deflection. It shifts the emotional responsibility onto you, while freeing the other person from accountability. It reframes your attempt at connection as conflict. It makes you question your motives even when they were sincere. And the more you fall into the loop of defending your intentions, the less space there is to address the actual issue. Over time, this tactic trains you to protect their feelings at the expense of your own voice, creating a dynamic where you